Hello and welcome to the 2022 Farm to School Canada Grants Reviewer instructional video. My name is Jessie Veenstra and I'm going to be walking you through the grant review process and some key documents that are going to help support you in that over the next few minutes. So I'm going to share my screen to present a little slide deck that we have that provides an overview. First of all, I just want to thank everybody for helping us in the review process of the Canada Grants. The grants are open to schools from across the country, and it's important to us to make sure that we have reviewers who score from the regions that the applications are coming from. So just huge thanks to everybody for your time and commitment to this process, which wouldn't be possible without all of you. So thank you. A few things that we're going to go over in the next couple of minutes. I'm going to first provide an introduction to what the grants are. We'll do a quick review of the farm to school approach because that is a really core component of the grants. And then we'll get into what the review process actually looks like and just go over the key documents that are going to help support each of you in scoring applications. So first of all, a little bit about the grants. These are grants that are provided in partnership with Whole Kids Foundation, and each applicant is eligible to receive up to $10,000 for a grant initiatives in their school over the course of 2 years. So schools are applying to officially kind of start their programs next school year, September 2022. That being said, if when you're looking at applications, you may see in the work plans that schools have some activities starting before then. That's totally fine. Schools sometimes like to get running in the spring and the summer, that leading up to their official start date, and that is absolutely fine. I want to just cover a little bit about what the grants are for. So I know some of you have scored in the past and will be familiar with that. We are making some continual upgrades, especially in light of our changing times. So there will be a few things that are familiar and some that might be slightly updated. So first of all, what are schools signing up for when they apply for a grant? Well, a really important aspect of the grants is that there is a meal service component. And this can be a new service that the school has, especially if the school doesn't have a cafeteria or any existing meal programs, or it can be something that enhances the programs and infrastructure that they already have in place. The emphasis with this is that there's an appetite to provide as much healthy and locally sourced food as possible. When considering this and scoring, we do encourage reviewers to take into account first of all, that schools' goals are realistic. So just because it's really important that we want to support our local farmers and other food providers, but it's not always necessarily possible to, for instance, provide all local food. So that's okay, we understand that. What we're really looking for with that is that schools are setting achievable goals with their meal service. It's also important to take into context the geographical location of the schools. So sometimes locally sourced food might be harder in some regions than others, especially in more northern and remote communities. So those are all important factors to take into consideration when scoring those components of the application. In terms of the meal service, you'll see that we ask schools to get it up and running by the midway point of the school year, and on average to serve 2 times a month. You'll see some schools might aim to serve every day or once a week or a couple of times a month. It just depends what suits their needs and the capacity that they have. So that can vary, but we do look for in the first year a meal service to be provided at least 8 times a year and then 20 times a year in the second year. And then that roughly works out to twice a month per the school year calendar. The other important components of the grants is that they should, in addition to the school meal service, they should demonstrate that they seek to meaningfully engage and build community partnerships, and also improve student food literacy through hands-on learning activities at school. And so all of this might sound pretty familiar, no surprise to the farm to school approach. So the grants do mirror these three aspects of providing healthy local food in schools, creating and strengthening community connections, and providing hands-on learning opportunities for students. So we are looking for a balance of all of these three in the grant applications. Also important to remember, this graphic is made to complement the farm to school approach on the previous slide, and it's in recognition that food systems look very different across our very geographically diverse country. And so these are important to take into consideration. As I mentioned a few minutes ago, local food can look very different in different schools. So that's always important to keep that in mind when scoring the applications. And we do want to make sure that schools have taken in that local context into account, and also the demographics and cultural identities and traditions of the students that they serve. So now that we've talked a little bit about the grant process, or sorry, what the grants are and the importance of the farm to school approach, just a quick overview of what the review and selection process looks like. Roughly, there are 4 steps in this. So the first step, we are done as applications are rolling in. We screen those to make sure that they're complete and meet the basic eligibility criteria. The ones that do then go on to the second phase, which all of you are helping to support. And this is really critical. This is kind of the most important aspect of the grants, and because this helps us to narrow down and shortlist applicants that we're going to choose from across the country. So this is where we have reviewers, at least 2 reviewers from each region. We try to have review and score every application. And there's both a numerical score and then qualitative feedback that we ask for that I'll get into in a moment. Once that process is complete, our team will review all of the scoring sheets that you have all submitted. And we look at those for each grant applicant just to identify any additional questions we might have. So we might conduct some follow-up, especially if we see discrepancies between 2 reviewers, just making sure that we get to the bottom of that. And we work with our regional partners to then finally shortlist grants from each region. And then we put that forward. We have a final selection committee that include members of our team and our advisory council who make final selections. So all of this said, we do consider the sort of numerical score. That's important for us to kind of help funnel the scores, but we also take into account the geographical location and looking for spread across the country, looking for a balance of English and French schools, schools in urban, rural, and remote communities, and generally just supporting the diversity across the country. So we look for a good breadth of applications. And last but certainly not least, a really important part is that there's potential to have high impact amongst the schools that apply. So now that we've talked a little bit about the process, I'm now going to get into sharing some documents that you're each going to receive and what the process for each of you is going to look like. So first of all, you will have received an email and it will include your application assignment. So each of you will receive a reviewer number, and then each of the applications is also numbered. And you'll receive a folder or access to a folder for each individual application. In that folder, you're going to find for sure 3 things. That is the application itself. It looks like an email, like you see here. The applications are submitted through an online form, and so they come to us in email format, but it's broken down and mirrors the matrix that you're going to be using to score. So it should be fairly straightforward to follow. In addition to the application, you'll see 2 Excel files. One is a work plan and one is a budget. These 3 files will always be labeled 01, 04, and 05 in each of your folders. And then in some, depending on what the schools have submitted, there are options to submit some additional attachments. So some schools you'll see there might be photos that complement certain questions throughout the application form. Some might choose to submit letters of support or other resources or things that their school has done. And so those are there for you to have a look at in the context of the application as you review it. So in addition to the application itself, there's 4 documents that are going to be your supports as you go through this process, and I'm just going to briefly go over each of them. So first, starting with the grant guidelines, you will receive a copy of these. They're also available on the grants page on our website. The important thing here is that this is what's been communicated to the grant recipients. It's what they've been using as a guide when they complete their application. So it's helpful if you can familiarize yourself with what's been communicated to them. In particular, pages 2 to 4 of this document have instructions around what funds can be used towards, and also how the applicants will be scored and selected. So it's worth definitely reviewing at least those pages 2 to 4. The next is a short document. This is a guideline for you as the reviewers. This is a quick reference guide for yourselves of this whole process. Includes instructions and key links to all of the documents that I'm talking about now, key contacts, as well as important dates and timelines for this whole process. Next is the scoring matrix. Now we're getting into the really key documents that you're probably going to want to have at your fingertips when you're reviewing and scoring the applications. This matrix is essentially the grant application template in Word format. And in it, we have added instructions for what to consider when scoring each of the questions. So I'm actually just going to go to that document and show you a few things. So on page 4, you'll see we start on the actual application questions. And you'll see that after each question, it's this blue box that you're looking for. You're going to want to check in with that as a reference point before you score the application. You will see that some questions don't actually ask you to assign a numerical score, but you will be given opportunity to provide any qualitative feedback. And so this goes on. You'll see most of the questions are scored out of 10. There's a few exceptions, so just keep an eye out for that as you work through the documents. A couple of things I will highlight here that I mentioned earlier. So where you source local food from. So again, supporting the local food system is a really important part of these grants. We're looking to help schools build their capacity to connect with their local food system and to source food from it. But please do keep in mind, and we recognize that that may be more challenging in some regions than others. So you'll see this question, we give a couple of options for schools to say where they're sourcing local food from. In previous years, we've looked for a variety of sources. And while that might be possible in some regions, it might not be in all. So it's not necessarily that a school should score poorly if they only have 1 or 2 of these. When you're scoring this question, just take into context the bigger picture of where the school is applying from. Is it a northern community? Is it an urban community? That's just an important consideration to make with this one that we want to highlight. The other one that I just want to speak to here, you'll see that schools have been asked, this is the very last question, before kind of getting into the work plan and budget. We ask schools to share how they will ensure the financial sustainability of their program beyond the school year. We know that this can be tricky because schools may not have sustained funding, and often programs like this are successful because of champions in the school that are either staff or sometimes volunteers. So we may see some schools that have really creative approaches to supporting the financial stability of the program beyond the grant cycle. But they don't necessarily have to have that crystal clear yet ultimately, the bottom line is that's important with this question is that we're looking that the school is going to have basically that there is a strong sense of support and a real appetite to bring farm to school and connection to the local food system and food literacy into the school, and really embed that into the school culture, not just for the next 2 years, but as the central part of the school and how they approach school food. So that's really the key thing to look at for that question. That is everything with respect to the scoring matrix. I'm now going to just go back to our slide deck here, and you'll see we're actually now going to just take a look at the scoring sheet. So the scoring sheet has 3 tabs. So you will receive an Excel file, and we ask you each to submit one of these. So this is going to be the key piece of information that you're going to provide back to us at the end of this process. The first tab just gives a bit of an overview, a lot of what I've spoken to already. The second tab is where you're going to enter responses for each of the questions that the applicants have completed. So first of all, you're going to do 1 line per application, and all of the applications you score can go in the sheet. We ask that you just put your reviewer name number as well. And for each question, you'll see you can provide a numerical score unless it's not required for that question, in which case it's been grayed out. And you can also add any additional comments that you think we should be aware of for that section. And then basically the questions work across horizontally across the sheet. When you get to the end and you review the full application and input your scores and comments, you're then just going to go to the last tab. Again, note the application number and your reviewer number. And then there's just a series of reflective questions on the application as a whole that we ask you just to kind of quickly work through. They're mostly tick boxes or yes or no. And then if you scroll over, there's a spot here at the end where you can provide any additional comments that you think would be helpful for us. And importantly, we actually ask each of you to share your own feeling of, would you fund the proposal, yes or no? And so that's something that we ask, and that's really helpful information for us to have when making our final decisions. So I've been through those sheets, and last I'll just kind of recap what competitive or successful applications look like. As I said at the start, they really embrace those 3 aspects of farm to school. So they include a meal service component. That can be a salad bar, absolutely, for those familiar with previous year's cycles. It can also be a variation on the salad bar. The important thing is that we're emphasizing student participation and choice as much as possible in that meal service, as well as serving locally sourced food where possible. It should also include the other 2 pillars, so connections to community partners, that includes farmers or producers, as well as a hands-on food literacy component. The next thing we're looking for is really just a clear vision and realistic goals. We want to know that what the schools are proposing is achievable within the timeline that's been set out, as well as their budget. Again, looking for evidence that there's strong support within the community to really help make, if they're successful in receiving a grant, to help make it take off and be a success. Realistic work plan and budget I've spoken to. And then last but not least, as I said earlier, is really just potential to really create an impact, a positive impact within the community. So those are some key things to consider. Again, encourage you to also review the grant guidelines that have been provided to the grant recipients that provide some important additional context. And last but not least, when you have reviewed your applications, we ask you to submit them to the regional lead in your region if you have one, as well as copy grants at farmtocafeteriacanada.ca. That is Jyotika, who many of you will have been communicating with. And if you do not have a regional lead in your region, you can just send it directly to Jyotika. As well, if you have any questions, feel free to send those to Jyotika. And finally, we just ask that you submit your scores by the end of the day on Friday, March 11th. And that is Pacific time because myself and Jessica are located in BC. So if that helps anyone with a few extra hours, that's great. You can also submit them anytime before that. And thank you again so much for your support in this process. Really excited to read your scores and responses and to help award another round of grants to schools in 2022. That is everything, and thanks so much.